The Merovingians were no ordinary dynasty. Emerging in the early medieval landscape of what is now France, they were considered long-haired kings, rulers whose flowing hair symbolized a sacred bloodline, believed to carry divine or mystical power. Their authority was not merely political, it was spiritual. Legends and obscure chronicles describe a lineage touched by the sacred, a family whose very existence was intertwined with prophecy, ritual, and the hidden currents of European power. From the beginning, the Merovingians were framed as extraordinary. Their ancestry was traced back to mythical or semi-divine origins, and their kings were seen as intermediaries between heaven and earth. This status set them apart from ordinary rulers, creating a dynasty whose influence was both feared and revered. But with sacred blood comes vulnerability. Their prominence made them targets for rivals who sought both power and the secrets the Merovingians were believed to guard. It is this combination of reverence and danger that sets the stage for a story of survival and secrecy. While history records battles, alliances, and political intrigue, the deeper narrative suggests a dynasty aware of its mystical significance, prepared to protect its knowledge and lineage at all costs. Their sacred blood was more than heritage. It was a responsibility, a hidden key to understanding the past and shaping the future. In this light, the Merovingian story is not only of kings and kingdoms, but of a secret mission to preserve what the world was not ready to see. The Merovingian bloodline was never merely a matter of ancestry or hereditary rule. It carried a weight that transcended political power, a mysterious aura that seemed to link those who bore it to forces beyond the ordinary. Referred to in hushed tones as the sacred blood, the lineage was rumored to possess qualities that set its holders apart from common mortals. Chroniclers and esoteric texts suggest that the Merovingians were believed to be chosen, marked from birth to carry knowledge, authority, and perhaps even a form of divine energy. Their blood was not simply a biological substance. It was said to be a vessel of hidden wisdom, a repository of ancient power stretching back to forgotten ages, and perhaps even beyond Europe itself. Medieval manuscripts, some barely surviving the passage of time, speak of kings who were not only rulers, but living symbols of a spiritual authority. The Merovingians' very presence was considered potent, and their lineage carefully guarded through ritual, secrecy, and strategic marriage alliances. Their long hair, a symbol of their sacred status, was meticulously maintained. No ordinary barber was allowed to touch it. Cutting it prematurely was forbidden, for it was believed to sever the connection to their ancestral power. Scholars of the occult would later interpret these practices as a coded language, a symbolic recognition that the bloodline itself held keys to hidden mysteries, powers that could shape destinies if properly understood. The concept of the sacred blood has fascinated historians and mystics alike for centuries. To the mainstream, it may appear to be nothing more than medieval superstition, the embellishment of chroniclers attempting to glorify kings who ruled by force of arms. Yet when we examine the evidence, patterns emerge that are difficult to dismiss. Reports of Merovingian longevity, unusual abilities, and even claims of prophetic insight suggest a culture that recognized something extraordinary in their rulers. The sacred blood was not just a claim to divine favor. It was an assertion of uniqueness, a secret inheritance that separated the Merovingians from ordinary lineages. Some researchers suggest that this belief in their blood's potency may have influenced their political strategies, their religious affiliations, and even their interactions with foreign powers. The Grail legend, one of the most enduring myths associated with European mysticism, is deeply intertwined with the Merovingian bloodline. While most narratives of the Grail focus on knights and quests, a less commonly discussed perspective links the sacred relic directly to the Merovingians themselves. In this version, the Grail is not a chalice alone, but a symbol of continuity, purity, and protection of a sacred lineage. It represents a knowledge encoded in blood, preserved through generations, and safeguarded by those aware of its significance. Some scholars argue that the Grail stories are veiled references to the bloodline itself, masked in allegory and legend, so that its true meaning would remain hidden from those not initiated into the secrets of history's most enigmatic dynasty. The aura surrounding the Merovingian bloodline was further complicated by the interplay of religion and politics. As Clovis and his successors converted to Christianity, they did so with careful attention to ritual, symbolism, and alliance building. Their sacred blood, they claimed, aligned them not only with the divine, but with the spiritual destiny of their people. But within these acts of public faith lay hidden layers of esoteric knowledge, practices, ceremonies, and teachings meant to be understood only by the initiates who walked the corridors of power. There is evidence to suggest that certain texts and oral teachings, now lost or deliberately destroyed, contain instructions on how to wield this sacred inheritance, a roadmap for those with the lineage to access abilities or insight beyond the common experience. Across the centuries, whispers of the Merovingians' extraordinary bloodline persisted even after the dynasty's political decline. Hidden documents, secret correspondences, and coded inscriptions hint that the bloodline may have been preserved in exile, kept alive in places that escaped the watchful eyes of rivals. Some esoteric historians speculate that knowledge of this sacred bloodline influenced later secret societies and mystical orders, who revered the Merovingians not merely for political legacy, but as custodians of a hidden wisdom. The connection to the sacred blood thus becomes a thread linking medieval Europe to a wider narrative of mystery, secrecy, and suppressed history. It is also worth considering the ways in which the Merovingians' sacred blood could have been perceived as threatening. For rival dynasties and political powers, a line of kings believed to carry divine authority or mystical knowledge represented not just competition, but danger. This may explain the systematic erasure and marginalization of the Merovingians from many mainstream chronicles, replaced with narratives that downplayed their significance or portrayed them as ineffectual. The idea that their blood was sacred could have been dangerous in a world where power was defined by control and obedience. Those who held the bloodline may have been forced into secrecy, their influence subtly preserved while remaining invisible to those outside the inner circle. Furthermore, the sacred blood is tied to the notion of destiny. The Merovingians were not merely passive heirs to power. They were believed to carry a role that transcended politics, a mission woven into the very fabric of history itself. Some scholars and theorists speculate that this destiny was both protective and generative. Protective in preserving secret knowledge, artifacts, or even lost technologies, and generative in guiding the course of history in ways that were subtle yet profound. In this light, the sacred blood is more than a curiosity. It is a lens through which to reinterpret centuries of European history, to see echoes of the Merovingians in unexpected places, and perhaps to trace their influence even to lands far beyond the borders of medieval Europe. As we continue to explore the mysteries of the Merovingians, the sacred blood becomes a central motif. It is a symbol of survival, secrecy, and hidden influence, a thread that connects the kings of the past with legends, prophecies, and secrets that may extend across oceans. Every ritual, every preserved document, every whispered story about the Merovingians reinforces the sense that their bloodline was not ordinary, that it carried knowledge, power, and purpose intended to endure even when their political power had waned. In examining this sacred blood, we are invited to challenge our assumptions about history itself. Was the Merovingian line simply a political dynasty, or was it something more profound, a vessel of hidden truths that the world has largely forgotten? The stories, the rituals, the symbols all suggest that there is more to the Merovingians than meets the eye. Their bloodline was not merely a relic of the past. It was a living thread connecting generations, carrying within it a story that mainstream history has never fully revealed, a story that we are only beginning to trace. Through this lens, the Merovingians become not just historical figures, but custodians of a mystery, guardians of a secret heritage that reaches far beyond Europe. Their sacred blood is both a key and a map, a guide to understanding the hidden currents of history, the layers of knowledge deliberately obscured, and the enduring legacy of a dynasty whose influence may yet be traced in ways that challenge everything we think we know about the past. The Merovingians' reign, despite its mystique and sacred bloodline, was not immune to the currents of politics, power struggles, and the relentless tide of history. Over the centuries, their influence waned, their authority challenged by ambitious rivals who sought to claim Europe's fragmented kingdoms. The Carolingians, a rising dynasty with both military might and strategic cunning, emerged as the instrument of the Merovingians' decline. To the casual observer, history paints a straightforward picture. The Merovingians were overtaken, stripped of power, and relegated to the margins of memory. But the truth, as always, is rarely so simple. Accounts of the Merovingians' final years in power are tantalizingly sparse, and this absence is itself a clue. Chronicles from the period suggest a slow erosion of authority, a process not only political but deeply symbolic. The kings, once celebrated for their sacred blood and long hair, began to be referred to as do-nothing kings by contemporaries, a term that historians have long debated. Was this a reflection of incompetence, or a deliberate effort by their successors to diminish their stature and obscure their achievements? Some scholars argue that these labels were part of a systematic campaign to rewrite history, ensuring that the Merovingians' legacy would appear irrelevant, their mystical significance erased from the narrative of Europe. The decline of the Merovingians was marked by both intrigue and subtle violence. Kings were manipulated, marriages orchestrated for political expediency, and heirs quietly removed or sidelined. Those who might have inherited and carried forward the sacred bloodline were often confined to monasteries or hidden estates, their movements restricted, their potential influence curtailed. Yet, whispers and secret chronicles suggest that not all were eliminated or confined. There are hints of escape, of carefully orchestrated disappearances designed to preserve the bloodline from the prying eyes of the Carolingian victors. Some theories propose that the Merovingians had long prepared for such an eventuality, keeping hidden networks and safe havens in Europe to protect their most important treasures, their descendants, their sacred knowledge, and perhaps even relics of profound significance. This notion of deliberate survival is key. The Merovingians were not merely passive victims of conquest. They were guardians of a legacy too precious to be extinguished. Political defeat in Europe may have been a veneer, a stage upon which the Carolingians could assert control while the true heirs of the Merovingian line moved quietly into exile. Letters, coded manuscripts, and obscure genealogical records hint at the possibility that some members of the bloodline were spirited away, their fates obscured by design. If these whispers are true, it suggests a level of foresight and strategy that surpasses mere politics. It hints at a dynasty acutely aware of its role in history and determined to endure beyond the confines of conventional chronicles. What makes the fall of the Merovingians so intriguing is the combination of public erasure and private preservation. While the Carolingians documented their victories and celebrated their rise, references to Merovingian kings began to vanish, replaced with vague footnotes or disparaging remarks. Yet, simultaneously, there is evidence in esoteric writings and private archives that the Merovingians' sacred bloodline persisted, sometimes under assumed identities, sometimes in the care of allies and sympathetic nobles. The suggestion is that even in defeat, the dynasty's mission continued, shielded from public view, preserved in secrecy, and prepared for opportunities that history had yet to reveal. The implications of this hidden survival are profound. If the Merovingians managed to escape the political sweep of the Carolingians, their influence may not have ended in Europe at all. Some theorists propose that the dynasty's exiled members carried their knowledge, rituals, and sacred blood across borders, perhaps even oceans, planting seeds that would flourish far from the lands in which they had been dethroned. Europe's history records the visible movements of kings and armies, but it often ignores what takes place in the shadows. The quiet preservation of knowledge, the careful planning for generations to come, the secret transmission of a lineage considered too potent to vanish. The Merovingians' fall, then, is not a simple story of loss. It is a story of concealment, strategy, and survival against forces determined to erase them. In every account that survives, there is a subtle tension between what was recorded and what may have been deliberately hidden. This tension forms the foundation for one of the most compelling mysteries in history. How could a dynasty so prominent, so sacred, seemingly disappear, only to leave traces that suggest they endured elsewhere? It is here, in this shadowed space between documented history and whispered rumor, that we encounter the possibility of their movement beyond Europe. Could the Merovingians, with their knowledge of sacred blood and mystical practices, have orchestrated an escape to lands unknown to the chroniclers of time? Could their descendants have carried the secrets of their lineage across seas, laying the groundwork for a hidden chapter of history that mainstream records ignore? These are not merely fanciful questions. They're the threads that draw us deeper into the story, bridging the gap between historical defeat and a hidden destiny. In examining the fall of the Merovingians, we are invited to see history not as a linear narrative of conquest and succession, but as a multi-layered story where the visible events mask deeper truths. Political defeat does not necessarily equal annihilation. An erasure from chronicles does not guarantee disappearance. The Merovingians, it seems, understood this better than their contemporaries. Their decline in Europe may have been theatrical, a carefully managed transition that allowed them to vanish from the eyes of the public while preserving what mattered most: the sacred bloodline, the knowledge they carried, and the potential for survival beyond the borders of continent. As we move forward in our exploration, we begin to trace the threads of that hidden survival. The fall of the Merovingians in Europe may have been the beginning, not the end, of a journey that could stretch across oceans and centuries. Their story, obscured by political rivals and deliberate suppression, hints at possibilities that challenge conventional history. In the chapters to come, we will follow these possibilities, examining evidence, legends, and theories that suggest the Merovingians' sacred legacy may have reached far beyond the lands they were thought to have lost, planting seeds in distant continents and setting the stage for mysteries that endure to this day. The story of the Merovingian survival becomes even more compelling when we entertain the possibility that their journey did not end in Europe. For centuries, scholars and mystics alike have speculated about European contact with the Americas long before Columbus set foot on those distant shores. While mainstream history often dismisses such theories as fanciful, a growing body of evidence, tantalizing anomalies, and ancient maps suggest that pre-Columbian voyages were far more plausible than we are typically led to believe. And within this framework, the Merovingians emerge not merely as a dynasty in decline, but as potential voyagers carrying sacred knowledge, hidden bloodlines, and perhaps even treasures across the Atlantic. To understand this possibility, we must first consider the maritime capabilities of early medieval Europe. Though the Middle Ages are often painted as a period of technological stagnation, the Franks, Normans, and other European peoples possessed sophisticated shipbuilding techniques, capable of navigating coastal waters and rivers with remarkable skill. Legends and obscure texts hint that the Merovingians, with their sacred knowledge and strategic foresight, may have had access to ships capable of open sea travel, vessels suited for more than local transport. If their survival and secrecy were at stake, crossing the Atlantic would not have been beyond their ambition or ingenuity. Some historians point to references in lost chronicles about mysterious fleets or secret expeditions, suggesting that the movement of elite lineages could have extended beyond Europe in ways deliberately hidden from the public record. The notion of Merovingian voyages to the New World is further supported by a variety of maps and geographic anomalies. Consider the Vinland sagas, which describe Norse exploration of North America centuries before Columbus, and the Piri Reis map, a 16th century chart showing coastlines of the Americas with surprising accuracy. While these documents do not explicitly mention the Merovingians, their existence opens the door to the possibility that European knowledge of the Atlantic and its distant lands was more extensive than commonly acknowledged. Could the Merovingians, seeking refuge and protection for their sacred bloodline, have leveraged this knowledge to navigate westward? Could they have established clandestine settlements in territories unknown to the chroniclers of Europe? These questions invite us to reimagine history not as a neat, linear progression, but as a web of secret voyages, hidden destinations, and deliberate omissions. There are also tantalizing references in obscure European chronicles that suggest early explorers with foreign or noble connections may have arrived in the Americas long before official discovery. Some reports describe foreign ships appearing on distant coasts, mysterious settlers with unknown origins, and symbols or markings that bear resemblance to European heraldry. Could these have been Merovingian descendants, carrying the sacred bloodline to new lands? The argument is strengthened by the fact that the Merovingians were not only politically aware, but deeply invested in the preservation of knowledge and lineage. If Europe had become too dangerous, the Atlantic could have represented not just an escape, but an opportunity, a blank canvas on which to safeguard their legacy, continue their bloodline, and preserve rituals and artifacts too potent to be left behind. But why would the Merovingians undertake such a perilous journey? The answer may lie in a combination of survival instinct, foresight, and the esoteric significance of their bloodline. For a dynasty that saw itself as custodians of sacred knowledge, remaining in Europe under the watchful eyes of rivals would have been a threat not just to their lives, but to the secrets they carried. By venturing westward, they could safeguard their lineage, create sanctuaries, and ensure that the knowledge embedded in their blood and traditions could endure. This was no ordinary migration. It was a calculated and deliberate movement, designed to protect a legacy that mainstream history has largely ignored or actively suppressed. The concept of a hidden Merovingian presence in the Americas is reinforced by anomalies in culture, technology, and settlement patterns that defy conventional explanation. Early European explorers frequently recorded encounters with structures, artifacts, or practices that seemed oddly familiar, yet did not fit the known timeline of discovery. Some researchers argue that these are remnants of a pre-Columbian European presence, potentially the work of displaced Merovingian descendants who carried both knowledge and ritual traditions across the Atlantic. Whether in the form of cryptic symbols, architectural echoes, or oral traditions preserved among indigenous communities, these subtle traces tantalize historians and enthusiasts alike, suggesting that the Merovingians' influence may have quietly persisted far from their European origins. Equally intriguing is the suggestion that sacred relics, texts, or even elements of the Grail myth may have traveled with these voyagers. If the Merovingians believed their bloodline to be sacred, it is plausible that they would not leave the artifacts and knowledge that define their identity behind. The Atlantic, then, could have become a repository not only for a fleeing dynasty, but for the preservation of rituals, wisdom, and relics that held symbolic or mystical significance. In this context, the Americas were not an unknown land to be conquered, but a sanctuary in which the Merovingian legacy could endure, hidden from the forces of history that sought to erase it. Of course, much of this remains speculation, and the lack of definitive record challenges researchers to read between the lines. Yet when we connect the dots, the maritime capabilities of the period, the mystical awareness of the dynasty, anomalies in early American history, and surviving legends, the possibility becomes difficult to dismiss outright. The Merovingians' purported journey to the Americas transforms from a flight of fancy into a coherent narrative of survival, foresight, and the relentless pursuit of secrecy. As we contemplate the notion of Merovingians crossing the Atlantic, it is important to understand that this is not merely a story of migration. It is a tale of ingenuity, courage, and the deliberate continuation of a sacred mission. These were not ordinary nobles seeking refuge. They were a lineage that believed their blood carried power and responsibility. Their journey across uncharted waters, if it occurred, represents a fusion of historical reality, strategic acumen, and mystical purpose, a convergence of factors that would shape the hidden chapters of history in ways that remain largely unrecorded. In tracing this path, we begin to glimpse a larger narrative, one that bridges Europe and the Americas, the visible and the hidden, the recorded and the suppressed. The Merovingians' potential voyages across the Atlantic challenge conventional timelines, rewrite assumptions about pre-Columbian exploration, and deepen the intrigue surrounding a dynasty whose sacred bloodline was as much a symbol of survival as of power. Their story invites us to look beyond maps, beyond chronicles, and into the shadows where history may conceal entire journeys that were never meant to be seen. This is the threshold at which our investigation moves forward, from the known, recorded history of Europe to the uncharted possibilities of a new world. From the fall of kings to the rise of hidden settlements, the journey of the Merovingians is no longer confined to a single continent or a single narrative. Across the Atlantic, in lands that were just beginning to whisper their own stories, the sacred bloodline may have found refuge, opportunity, and perhaps the chance to continue a mission that history had tried to erase. The idea that the Merovingians might have crossed the Atlantic raises a question that has long fascinated historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts of alternative history alike. What traces, if any, did they leave behind? For centuries, conventional archaeology has followed a linear narrative. Europeans arrived in the Americas with Columbus in 1492. Yet, scattered across the continent are anomalies that resist easy explanation. Structures, symbols, artifacts, and cultural patterns that hint at contact long before the age of discovery. Could these be the subtle footprints of a displaced European dynasty, a bloodline determined to survive and preserve its sacred knowledge far from the reach of the Carolingians? In parts of North America, from the rugged coasts of Newfoundland to the dense forests of the eastern seaboard, there are remnants of settlements that seem to contradict established timelines. Take, for instance, the so-called mysterious fortifications and European-style construction techniques found in early archaeological digs. These structures, often dismissed as misinterpretations or later fabrications, possess characteristics strikingly similar to medieval European architecture, particularly elements reminiscent of Frankish fort designs. Some researchers suggest that the Merovingians, familiar with such designs and seeking to recreate familiar structures in a new land, may have brought this architectural knowledge across the Atlantic. These were not simply crude shelters for survival. They were deliberate, well-planned constructions echoing a culture that valued symbolism, ritual, and sacred geometry. Artifacts, too, offer tantalizing clues. Coins, ceremonial objects, and tools have been unearthed in locations far removed from known European settlements of the period, and while mainstream scholarship often dismisses them as anomalies or outright hoaxes, their existence invites deeper scrutiny. Certain artifacts display intricate designs, heraldic markings, or inscriptions that resonate with Merovingian symbols, some echoing the motifs of long-haired kings and sacred blood. Could these objects have been left behind by a line of exiled nobles seeking to preserve their heritage in a world that had become dangerous to them? The evidence, while circumstantial, forms a pattern, a subtle breadcrumb trail leading us toward a possibility that has been deliberately obscured in conventional history. Beyond physical artifacts, there are cultural echoes that suggest a European influence predating Columbus. Some indigenous oral traditions recount encounters with strangers bearing unusual knowledge, advanced metallurgy, or distinct religious rituals. While these stories are often marginalized in mainstream research, they hint at interactions that were real enough to leave an impression on local communities. Could these encounters have been with Merovingian descendants, quietly integrating into or observing the societies they encountered? Unlike colonial settlements, which often impose themselves violently, these hypothetical Merovingian enclaves may have moved carefully, preserving their secrecy while leaving subtle imprints on the cultural fabric of the land. Linguistic traces further deepen the mystery. Early reports describe strange words, names, or phrases that bear a faint resemblance to European tongues, yet are out of place both temporally and geographically. These anomalies might suggest contact with Europeans long before official colonization, potentially including members of the Merovingian line. Language is a powerful marker of influence and movement, and even fleeting traces preserved in oral history can hint at exchanges that would otherwise remain invisible to archaeology. Geography, too, plays a role in these hidden traces. Certain settlements, positioned strategically along rivers, coastlines, or fertile valleys, suggest knowledge of navigation and the natural world that surpasses what would have been expected of ordinary medieval migrants. The Merovingians, as a dynasty familiar with both European politics and ritualistic precision, would have understood the importance of selecting locations that offered both sustenance and secrecy. These choices, subtle yet deliberate, reflect a sophistication that aligns with what we know of the Merovingian approach to power: meticulous, strategic, and deeply aware of symbolism and protection. One of the most compelling aspects of this hidden history is the possibility that the Merovingians brought with them more than material culture. Rituals, ceremonial knowledge, and sacred symbolism may have traveled alongside the physical artifacts. European chroniclers often noted the importance of sacred relics to the Merovingian kings. The Grail, sacred oils, and even encoded documents or codices that carried knowledge of the bloodline. If any of these survived the journey across the Atlantic, they could have been carefully concealed within settlements, preserved in ways that would remain undetected by outsiders. The presence of objects or sites with unexplained ceremonial significance in early American contexts could point to this hidden transmission of sacred knowledge. Even more subtle are the myths and legends that appear in both European and indigenous contexts, sometimes separated by oceans, but sharing curious similarities. Stories of long-haired rulers, mysterious visitors with strange knowledge, or sacred objects echo across continents, often framed differently, but retaining recognizable motifs. Could these be the cultural residue of a Merovingian presence in the Americas, a whisper of history that survived in the margins rather than the mainstream narrative? When viewed together, these fragments, artifacts, architecture, oral tradition, and myth, form a mosaic that suggests a European influence in a new world that defies conventional explanation. Yet, for all their subtlety, these clues are often deliberately obscured or dismissed. Mainstream archaeology has historically favored explanations that fit the accepted narrative of discovery and colonization. Anomalies are explained away as misinterpretations, hoaxes, or random coincidence. But the very act of erasure reinforces the idea that certain histories were never meant to be widely known. The Merovingians, as a dynasty accustomed to secrecy, may have anticipated this, structuring their settlements, artifacts, and symbolic markers in ways that would only be understood by those with the knowledge to read them. A hidden history concealed in plain sight. The challenge, then, is to see beyond the conventional timeline and recognize the possibility that these scattered traces are interconnected. What initially appear as isolated curiosities, an anomalous coin, a peculiar building foundation, an indigenous story of mysterious strangers, may actually be pieces of a larger puzzle. When combined, they suggest the presence of a lineage whose survival depended on discretion, foresight, and a profound understanding of symbolism. The Merovingians, carrying their sacred bloodline and ancient knowledge, may have left these subtle imprints as markers of both identity and continuity, a quiet assertion that their legacy endured despite the erasure of history. Ultimately, the archaeological and cultural clues hint at a narrative that challenges our assumptions about the Americas' early history. They invite us to consider that the continent was not a blank canvas awaiting European discovery, but a landscape that may have witnessed secret arrivals, hidden settlements, and the careful preservation of a sacred bloodline. The Merovingians, masters of both political strategy and esoteric wisdom, could have been the architects of this hidden chapter, creating a network of influence that leaves traces detectable only to those who know where and how to look. As we continue our journey, these clues will serve as the foundation for deeper exploration. They allow us to bridge the gap between myth and history, to trace a line from Europe's sacred dynasties to the uncharted territories of the New World, and to begin assembling a picture of a story deliberately concealed by time, politics, and the deliberate erasure of rivals. The footprints are faint, the evidence fragmented, but when examined with care, a tantalizing possibility emerges: that the Merovingians did not vanish. They endured, leaving traces of their presence for those willing to seek beyond the surface of recorded history. Among the most tantalizing aspects of the Merovingian legacy is the suggestion that they carried not only their bloodline, but also sacred knowledge and relics of immense significance. Central to these legends is the idea of the Grail, not merely as a chalice of medieval myth, but as a symbol of divine authority, secret wisdom, and a connection to the sacred bloodline itself. In the Merovingian worldview, such artifacts were far more than ceremonial objects. They were vessels of power, repositories of knowledge, and, crucially, tools for preserving the continuity of the dynasty in times of crisis. The Grail, in its many interpretations, is often described as a mysterious object that bestows life, protection, or spiritual insight. Within the Merovingian context, it is sometimes portrayed as intimately linked to the bloodline, carrying encoded secrets that only the rightful heirs could access. Some esoteric scholars suggest that the Grail represents a form of sacred inheritance, a symbol of the continuity of divine knowledge, and a reminder that the Merovingians were custodians of something far larger than themselves. It was not merely a cup to be sought in a quest, but a marker of identity, a key to understanding the mysteries of the past and guiding the destiny of the future. If the Merovingians did indeed flee Europe, their journey across the Atlantic would not have been undertaken lightly, nor would they have abandoned the relics that define their lineage. It is plausible that sacred objects, cryptic manuscripts, and ceremonial tools traveled with them, carefully concealed and protected from those who might misuse or destroy them. In this sense, the Americas could have functioned not only as a refuge, but as a hidden repository, a place where the bloodline's sacred artifacts could be preserved, studied, and safeguarded for generations. The journey was more than physical. It was an act of preservation, ensuring that knowledge encoded in symbols, rituals, and relics endured beyond the reach of historical erasure. Archaeological anomalies provide subtle hints that such sacred objects may have left their mark in the New World. Certain sites contain patterns, alignments, or structures that echo European ceremonial practices, suggesting the deliberate placement of items with spiritual or symbolic significance. While mainstream archaeology often interprets these features as coincidence or indigenous innovation, the possibility of deliberate design cannot be dismissed. These markers, subtle yet deliberate, could indicate the presence of a culture that carried not just knowledge, but an understanding of sacred geometry, ritual, and lineage, hallmarks of the Merovingian tradition. In addition to physical artifacts, the Grail legend suggests the preservation of esoteric knowledge. The Merovingians were known to intertwine political power with ritual and symbolism, and their sacred bloodline may have carried encoded teachings, secret histories, or instructions for safeguarding the dynasty's heritage. Such knowledge could have been transmitted orally, through ritualized practice, or hidden within manuscripts and objects too fragile or cryptic to survive the ravages of time. If any of this knowledge made its way to the Americas, it would have been carefully concealed, accessible only to those trained in the interpretation of its symbols, a hidden network of wisdom preserved under the veil of secrecy. The concept of sacred objects extends beyond the Grail itself. European chronicles and esoteric writings hint at additional relics, sacred oils, ceremonial swords, and inscribed codices that may have accompanied the Merovingians in exile. These items were not merely ceremonial. They were symbols of continuity, designed to reinforce the legitimacy of the bloodline and to ensure that future generations understood their heritage. In a new land, these objects could have been hidden within natural landscapes, buried beneath foundations, or stored in secret chambers, waiting for the right moment or the right heirs to reveal their purpose. The very act of carrying sacred objects across the Atlantic speaks to the meticulous planning and foresight of the Merovingians. They were not refugees fleeing without direction. They were custodians of a legacy, moving with precision and intention. Every artifact, every ritual, every symbol could have been part of a larger plan to ensure that the knowledge encoded in their bloodline and in the objects they carried would survive beyond the reach of political rivals. The Atlantic, vast and largely uncharted, provided both danger and opportunity, a space in which to safeguard secrets from those who might exploit them. Legends that survived in European and indigenous contexts alike hint at the persistence of these sacred relics and knowledge. Stories of mysterious visitors, sacred objects, or rituals with no clear origin often appear in unexpected places, echoing motifs from Merovingian Europe. Could these be traces of a hidden presence, fragments of a culture transplanted across the ocean, carrying with it both bloodline and sacred artifacts? The similarities, though subtle, suggest that these myths may have preserved truths long obscured by the dominant historical narrative. Even the symbolism associated with the Merovingians themselves reinforces the idea of sacred preservation. Long hair, ceremonial garments, heraldic markings, and coded gestures all point to a culture deeply conscious of identity and continuity. If such symbolism was carried to the Americas, it would have created a living network of markers, visible to the initiated, invisible to outsiders. Sacred objects and rituals, then, were not isolated artifacts. They were part of a comprehensive system of knowledge, a language of symbols and practices that ensured the dynasty's secrets endured across time and space. The Grail, in particular, represents a convergence of bloodline, knowledge, and destiny. In a new land, it could have served multiple purposes: a spiritual anchor, a protective talisman, and a key to unlocking the encoded wisdom of the Merovingians. Its presence, whether literal or symbolic, underscores the idea that the dynasty's journey was about more than mere survival. It was about preserving the essence of a lineage, safeguarding knowledge that was considered too important to risk losing, and creating a foundation for future generations to maintain continuity in the face of history's erasure. Ultimately, The sacred objects and Grail-related legends illuminate the deeper purpose of the Merovingians' hidden journey. Their flight was not random, nor was it solely political. It was a deliberate act of preservation, a careful orchestration designed to ensure that their sacred bloodline, esoteric knowledge, and the artifacts that defined their identity could endure far beyond the borders of Europe. The traces of these relics, subtle yet persistent, offer a tantalizing glimpse into a history that mainstream accounts have largely ignored or suppressed. In exploring these sacred objects, we begin to see the Merovingians not just as a medieval dynasty, but as guardians of a hidden legacy. Their journey, their rituals, and their careful preservation of knowledge transform them into figures whose influence may stretch far beyond what is recorded in conventional history. The Grail and other sacred relics are not merely myths. They're keys to understanding a lineage that has endured in secret, carrying its mysteries across oceans and through time, hidden from those who would have sought to destroy or forget it. The enduring mysteries surrounding the Merovingians become even more fascinating when we explore their potential connections to secret societies, groups that have long captured the imagination of historians, mystics, and conspiracy theorists alike. From the Templars to the Freemasons, these organizations are often depicted as guardians of hidden knowledge, keepers of rituals, and protectors of lineages considered too powerful or sacred to be left unmonitored. While mainstream history frequently portrays them as loosely organized fraternities or quasi-mythical orders, a closer examination suggests that some of these societies may have had more direct links to the Merovingians than is commonly acknowledged, acting as custodians of the bloodline's secrets and the sacred knowledge it carried. The Knights Templar, perhaps the most famous of these secretive organizations, were originally a religious military order with a mandate to protect pilgrims and holy sites in the Holy Land. Yet beyond their public duties, there's a growing body of evidence that the Templars were involved in esoteric practices, the safeguarding of sacred relics, and the protection of knowledge deemed too dangerous for ordinary society. Some historians and esoteric scholars argue that the Merovingians, with their sacred bloodline and mystical traditions, may have had indirect or even direct influence over the Templars. Legends tell of Templar involvement with relics, codices, and artifacts believed to originate with or be associated with the Merovingian kings. Could it be that these elite knights were entrusted with guarding the legacy of a dynasty that had been deliberately erased from mainstream chronicles? Freemasonry, emerging centuries later, also provides intriguing connections to this hidden lineage. While the organization is typically described as a fraternity of stonemasons and builders, its rituals, symbols, and allegories frequently reference ancient dynasties, sacred geometry, and mystical wisdom. Certain esoteric interpretations suggest that Freemasonry preserved knowledge passed down from the Merovingians, encoded within ceremonial practices, symbols, and degrees of initiation. The very emphasis on lineage, secrecy, and ritual in these societies echoes the principles that the Merovingians themselves would have valued: the safeguarding of sacred knowledge, the continuity of a bloodline, and the subtle influence over historical events without overt display of power. It is important to recognize that these connections, while speculative, are supported by tantalizing historical threads. Many early Templars hailed from regions formerly under Merovingian influence, and some documents hint at interactions between members of the bloodline and the order. Certain medieval texts, now fragmented or lost, allude to the transfer of sacred objects, coded knowledge, or instructions intended to preserve the Merovingian legacy through discrete channels. In the case of Freemasonry, the symbolic continuity of ritual and reference to ancient kings and lineages may reflect a deliberate preservation of Merovingian heritage, encoded in allegory and ceremonial practice to survive the centuries in secrecy. The protective role of these secret societies is particularly significant when considering the Merovingians' exile or potential migration to the Americas. If members of the bloodline did indeed cross the Atlantic, the knowledge that they carried could not risk exposure to outsiders. Secret societies with international networks, discreet methods of communication, and esoteric expertise would have been ideal allies. They could provide guidance, protection, and continuity, ensuring that the sacred bloodline's knowledge and artifacts were safely transported, preserved, and possibly even integrated into new settlements without detection. The possibility of such collaboration opens a window into a hidden network of influence, one that bridges continents, centuries, and political upheaval. The symbols associated with these societies also point toward Merovingian connections. Long-haired figures, sacred geometrical designs, and motifs of divine kingship recur in both Templar and Masonic iconography. While such symbols are often dismissed as decorative or allegorical, their recurrence across organizations and centuries suggests the possibility of a shared esoteric language, a coded system meant to preserve knowledge, communicate legitimacy, and maintain continuity with a sacred bloodline. These symbols could serve as markers of identity, allowing members of the bloodline and those entrusted with their secrets to recognize one another, even in distant lands or under new identities. In addition to symbols, certain rituals and myths within these societies hint at the safeguarding of a hidden lineage. Initiation ceremonies, secret oaths, and the passing of knowledge in coded or allegorical form could all serve as mechanisms to ensure that only those properly trained or aware could access the true significance of the sacred bloodline. In this context, secret societies are not merely clubs or social organizations. They are living repositories of history, wisdom, and lineage designed to protect what mainstream society would otherwise suppress or destroy. The Merovingians, as custodians of sacred knowledge, would have had every reason to align themselves with such groups, whether directly or indirectly, to ensure the survival of their legacy. The interaction between the Merovingians and secret societies also sheds light on the broader pattern of hidden history. The systematic erasure of the Merovingians from public chronicles may have been counterbalanced by the careful preservation of their influence through discrete networks. These societies, operating behind the veil of secrecy, could maintain the continuity of bloodline, knowledge, and ritual, even as European political powers sought to erase their memory. This dual strategy, public erasure paired with private preservation, offers a compelling explanation for why the Merovingians appear to vanish from historical records while still leaving an enduring imprint on culture, mythology, and mystical traditions. Furthermore, the connection to secret societies provides a potential explanation for the persistence of Merovingian legends in the Americas. If the bloodline was transported across the Atlantic, the knowledge encoded within it may have been further safeguarded by local or transatlantic networks of adherents, initiates, and sympathizers. The preservation of rituals, symbols, and sacred objects could have continued quietly, shaping the foundations of hidden communities and influencing cultural practices without drawing the attention of mainstream historians. In this way, secret societies serve as a bridge between continents, a mechanism for continuity, and a custodian of a lineage that history has tried to erase. Ultimately, examining the Merovingians through the lens of secret societies transforms our understanding of their legacy. They were not simply a dynasty of kings, nor merely historical actors in Europe's political drama. They were custodians of sacred knowledge, travelers across continents, and participants in a hidden network of influence that extended far beyond the public eye. Through Templars, Freemasons, and possibly other esoteric groups, the Merovingians' bloodline and wisdom could have been preserved, transmitted, and subtly woven into the fabric of history, leaving traces that are only now beginning to be recognized by those willing to look beyond the conventional narrative. In tracing these connections, we begin to see the Merovingians not as isolated figures of a bygone age, but as part of a continuum, a network of lineage, ritual, and secrecy that stretches across centuries and continents. Their survival, influence, and preservation of sacred knowledge are reflected in the symbols, stories, and networks that endure to this day, quietly reminding us that history is rarely as simple as it seems, and that the hidden forces shaping our world often operate in silence, behind the veil of the recorded past. The story of the Merovingians does not end in medieval Europe or in hidden settlements across the Atlantic. Its echoes reverberate even into the present, carried forward through legends, rumors, and conspiracy theories that insist the sacred bloodline has never truly vanished. Today, scholars, enthusiasts, and theorists debate the possibility that descendants of this ancient dynasty still walk among us, their presence hidden in plain sight, influencing events, or quietly preserving the legacy of a line that has been deliberately erased from mainstream history. The very idea that a bloodline could survive for over a millennium in secrecy challenges our assumptions about lineage, identity, and the forces that shape history. The notion of modern descendants of the Merovingians often intersects with speculation about hidden power. Some theorists suggest that members of this bloodline may have infiltrated European nobility, religious institutions, or even modern political systems, maintaining influence in ways invisible to the general public. Whether through strategic marriages, discreet alliances, or participation in secret societies, these descendants could be seen as carriers of an inheritance far more subtle than crowns or territory, the inheritance of sacred knowledge, ritual, and blood. To the casual observer, they may appear as ordinary individuals, but the legends hint at something far more potent, a legacy of wisdom, authority, and the continuity of a sacred mission stretching across centuries. Modern conspiracy theories surrounding the Merovingians often intertwine with claims about secret societies, global elites, and hidden histories. Popular culture, fiction, and speculative nonfiction have amplified the mystique, presenting the bloodline as a thread connecting everything from the Templars to the Freemasons, from religious relics to coded documents, from unexplained historical events to clandestine influence over world affairs. While skeptics dismiss these narratives as fantasy, the persistence of such claims reflects a deep fascination with the idea that history is not merely a record of events, but a carefully curated narrative in which certain truths are hidden from public view. The Merovingians, with their sacred bloodline, are positioned at the intersection of this hidden knowledge and historical erasure, serving as a symbol of what might exist beyond the reach of conventional understanding. The survival of the Merovingian bloodline into modern times is also reflected in claims about supposed descendants living in secrecy. Genealogical researchers, often relying on fragmented records, coded manuscripts, and cryptic historical clues, have attempted to trace the lineage through centuries of obscured history. While definitive proof is elusive, patterns emerge that suggest certain families may carry traces of Merovingian heritage, particularly in regions historically associated with Frankish rule. These investigations, though speculative, point to a continuity that aligns with the traditions of secrecy, preservation, and careful protection that define the dynasty. The sacred bloodline, if it survives, is more than a historical curiosity. It is a living legacy, hidden yet potent, quietly influencing the course of events. Equally compelling are the modern myths and symbolic interpretations associated with the Merovingians. Some theorists posit that the bloodline carries encoded wisdom, ritualistic practices, or esoteric knowledge that has been preserved through generations. This knowledge may be subtle, integrated into family traditions, ceremonial practices, or even coded in art, architecture, and literature. The premise is not that the bloodline grants supernatural powers in the popular sense, but that it embodies a continuity of understanding, a preservation of secret wisdom that has been carefully guarded against the erosion of time and the scrutiny of outsiders. The Merovingians, in this framework, are as much custodians of knowledge as they are heirs to a lineage. The allure of the Merovingians in contemporary culture also stems from the intersection of history and narrative speculation. Popular books, documentaries, and films have dramatized the bloodline, often linking it to the Grail, the Templars, and other symbols of secret knowledge. These portrayals, while sensationalized, reflect a deeper fascination with the idea that hidden lineages continue to shape the world in ways that official history does not acknowledge. They invite viewers and readers to question what is recorded and what is concealed, to consider the possibility that the past contains layers of truth that have been deliberately obscured. In this sense, the Merovingians serve as a bridge between historical fact, esoteric legend, and contemporary imagination, creating a narrative that is both mysterious and compelling. The modern implications of the Merovingian bloodline also intersect with theories of power and influence. Some speculate that those who carry the sacred lineage could have access to networks of knowledge, secret alliances, or insights that give them subtle control over events or institutions. These ideas are often framed in the language of conspiracy, yet they resonate because they challenge conventional assumptions about power and history. If a bloodline has survived in secret for over a millennium, it suggests a continuity that transcends traditional political or social structures, revealing a dimension of influence that operates quietly, indirectly, and beyond public scrutiny. Even outside the realm of speculation, the idea of the Merovingians as a living legacy invites reflection on how history is recorded and remembered. The deliberate erasure of their achievements and the mystique surrounding their bloodline remind us that the historical record is not neutral. Political, religious, and social forces shape what is preserved, suppressed, or celebrated. By considering the possibility that the Merovingians' influence persists today, we confront the tension between recorded history and hidden truth, recognizing that some legacies are designed to endure precisely because they remain unseen, quietly shaping the world from the shadows. In a broader cultural sense, the Merovingians have become a symbol of continuity, secrecy, and hidden authority. They are invoked in stories about lost knowledge, secret lineages, and the hidden threads that connect past and present. Their sacred bloodline is not just a genealogical curiosity. It is a narrative device that challenges us to think differently about history, to consider what might exist beyond conventional records, and to explore the ways in which powerful ideas, knowledge, and influence can survive in secrecy over centuries. Finally, the modern fascination with the Merovingians underscores a fundamental human desire to uncover hidden truths. Whether one believes in the literal survival of the bloodline or views it as a symbolic story, the legend invites curiosity, investigation, and reflection. It encourages us to question received narratives, to explore the shadows of history, and to recognize that the past is far more complex and layered than surface accounts suggest. The Merovingians, in this sense, remain alive, not only in potential descendants, but in the enduring mysteries and stories that continue to captivate the imagination. Through this lens, the sacred bloodline becomes both historical and symbolic, tangible and metaphorical. It is a reminder that history is not fixed, that knowledge can be preserved against suppression, and that legacies, like the Merovingians themselves, can endure in ways that are subtle, hidden, and profoundly influential. The sacred bloodline, carried through centuries of secrecy, mystery, and careful preservation, challenges us to look beyond the obvious, to consider the invisible forces shaping the world, and to recognize that some of history's most powerful stories have always been hidden in plain sight. Symbols have always been the secret language of power, a way to communicate ideas that the untrained eye might overlook. Across Europe, The Merovingians left a delicate web of signs, subtle yet unmistakable for those who knew how to read them. From the distinctive long-haired kings depicted in coinage and manuscripts, to the enigmatic motifs carved into cathedrals and royal seals, their influence was as much visual as it was political. Every line, curve, and emblem carried meaning, an encoded message that hinted at bloodline legitimacy, sacred authority, and connections to mystical knowledge. The fleur-de-lis, the most famous of all Merovingian symbols, is one such example. Traditionally associated with French royalty, it may have been far more than a mere emblem of kingship. Some historians suggest it represents the convergence of divine and earthly authority, a subtle marker of the sacred lineage. Its appearance across centuries on flags, coats of arms, and architectural details whispers of a legacy the Merovingians sought to preserve long after their formal power had vanished. As this story unfolds, and we follow the trail across the Atlantic, it becomes apparent that symbols were never confined to Europe. Remarkably, echoes of Merovingian imagery appear in the New World as well, scattered in ways that defy conventional explanation. In early colonial settlements, explorers' accounts describe carvings and decorative motifs on buildings and artifacts that resemble European designs, yet they seem to appear independently, in places where contact with France was improbable. Some researchers have even proposed that Native American petroglyphs and ceremonial objects bear patterns that parallel Merovingian iconography, not in exact form, but in principle and symmetry. The question emerges, were these symbols the result of coincidence or evidence of a forgotten cultural transmission? Could the Merovingians, in their flight from Europe or in secret explorations, have planted these visual clues as a silent testament to their presence? Beyond mere decoration, symbols were often repositories of encoded knowledge. Alchemy, astrology, and other esoteric disciplines used imagery as mnemonic devices, carrying teachings that were too dangerous or secret to be written plainly. The Merovingians were rumored to have been initiates of ancient wisdom, guardians of sacred truths that stretched back to pre-Christian Europe and perhaps even older civilizations. By embedding these lessons in symbolic form, they ensured that only those with proper instruction could access them. Across America, hidden symbols etched into stone, painted on early colonial buildings, or embedded in family crests may have served the same purpose: a silent instruction manual for those deemed worthy to inherit the knowledge. One of the most compelling examples comes from a network of early European settlements along rivers and trade routes in what would become the eastern United States. Here, the design of certain bridges, municipal seals, and even the layout of town squares appears to mirror geometric principles found in Merovingian-era architecture in France. Squares and circles, intersecting lines, and floral motifs seem to repeat, almost like a signature. To the casual observer, these patterns are merely decorative, but to the initiated, they speak of lineage, authority, and the persistence of a hidden tradition. The recurrence of these forms over centuries suggests a deliberate act. Someone wanted to leave a trace of Merovingian presence, even if it was to be understood only by a select few. Heraldry, too, played a crucial role. Coat of arms motifs associated with long-lost Merovingian families can be traced across the Atlantic, appearing in the archives of colonial settlers who carried European aristocratic traditions with them. Even when the original families were no longer powerful in France, their symbols traveled, appearing in muted forms, on gravestones, official seals, and private correspondence. It is as if the visual language of the Merovingians acted as a bridge across time and space, preserving memory when written records were destroyed or censored. Perhaps the most mysterious aspect is the intentional placement of symbols in nature itself. Some researchers suggest that early settlements were aligned with sacred geometry, a principle often linked to the Merovingians' supposed mystical knowledge. Hills, rivers, and ceremonial grounds may have been chosen to echo the geometric patterns of their ancestral lands. Rocks and cliffs bear carvings that mirror symbols from Merovingian Europe, creating a landscape that functions like a vast, outdoor manuscript. Here, history is encoded not in books, but in the very environment, a silent testament to a lineage that refused to vanish completely. All of this raises profound questions. If the Merovingians did leave such traces in the New World, why were they so careful to remain hidden? The answer seems tied to survival. Their fall from power in Europe was catastrophic, and any overt display of influence could invite persecution or erasure. Symbols offered a way to assert continuity and communicate across generations without attracting dangerous attention. They were a subtle form of resistance, a way to survive in exile while keeping the sacred memory alive. As we trace these symbols from Europe to America, a new picture emerges, one that defies the neat lines of conventional history. The Merovingians were not merely a dynasty erased from power. They were a people who understood the enduring power of visual language, who used it to leave clues across continents and centuries. By observing these symbols with care, one can begin to reconstruct a hidden narrative of migration, influence, and secret knowledge. A story that whispers of kings and sacred bloodlines, silently woven into the very fabric of a new world. In the next chapters, we will see how these symbols intersect with mysterious manuscripts, secret societies, and prophecies, revealing an intricate tapestry of history and myth. What appears at first glance to be mere decoration may, in fact, be a map, an encoded guide to a hidden legacy that stretches across oceans and generations, waiting for those willing to read between the lines. In the shadows of official records, there exist fragments of forgotten history, fleeting glimpses of encounters that mainstream chronicles have long ignored. These are the remnants of lives that intersected with the Merovingians, traces left by travelers, settlers, and chroniclers who glimpsed something extraordinary and sought to record it. Many of these accounts are fragmented, scattered across obscure archives, or hidden in the footnotes of texts deemed unworthy of serious study. Yet, when pieced together, they suggest a web of contact and influence stretching from Europe to the Americas, a trail that hints at a deliberate migration and clandestine operations beyond the reach of conventional historians. Early explorers' journals offer tantalizing hints. Some describe encounters with pale-skinned strangers, speaking an unfamiliar tongue, dressed in garments resembling the attire of European nobility. These travelers carried with them ornate items, relics, coins, and ceremonial objects that bore symbols strikingly similar to those of the long-haired kings of France. Even when dismissed as exaggeration or misinterpretation, the recurring patterns across independent accounts suggest something more than mere coincidence. The presence of these enigmatic visitors challenges the assumption that European influence in the New World began solely with Columbus or later colonial expeditions. Among these fragments, there are references to secret gatherings and private councils. Certain letters hint at clandestine meetings between indigenous leaders and European emissaries, conducted far from prying eyes. Within these interactions, knowledge and technology were shared in limited ways, carefully guarded from mainstream authorities. Some scholars speculate that the Merovingians, aware of their precarious position in Europe, sought to establish safe havens across the Atlantic. In these hidden enclaves, they could preserve their traditions, teach their esoteric knowledge, and maintain their lineage in relative secrecy. The records are ambiguous, often poetic or allegorical, but they suggest a deliberate attempt to weave the Merovingian legacy into the fabric of a new world. Indigenous oral histories, too, contain echoes that some researchers interpret as referencing Merovingian presence. Stories speak of pale visitors arriving from distant lands, carrying objects imbued with mysterious power and imparting knowledge of the stars, geometry, and sacred rituals. While these accounts are often dismissed as myth, a careful comparison with European chronicles reveals curious parallels. Could these oral traditions be preserving a memory of actual events, filtered through centuries of cultural interpretation? And if so, what were these travelers' intentions, and what knowledge did they hope to transmit? Equally compelling are the traces left in material culture. Coins, jewelry, and carved artifacts discovered in early North American settlements bear symbols that are strikingly Merovingian in origin. These items are often discovered in contexts that seem out of place, predating known European colonization or appearing in regions historically thought to have had little contact with the Old World. Their existence raises profound questions. How did they arrive there? And what was their purpose? Were they tokens of diplomacy, markers of hidden settlements, or sacred relics transported to ensure continuity of the bloodline? Each artifact is a fragment of a puzzle that mainstream history has largely ignored. Yet taken together, they paint a portrait of a lineage refusing to vanish. The act of recording and preserving these encounters appears to have been fraught with danger. Some explorers' manuscripts were destroyed, censored, or altered, likely because the presence of Merovingian descendants posed a threat to established authorities. In other cases, accounts were quietly buried in monasteries or private libraries, surviving only as marginal notes or cryptic illustrations. The fragmentary nature of these records only adds to the sense of intrigue. Each discovery feels like uncovering a hidden doorway into a world that official history has tried to erase. One particularly fascinating example comes from the writings of a 17th century Jesuit missionary in North America. In his diary, he recounts seeing a group of European-looking individuals living in a remote valley, practicing rituals and wearing distinctive clothing that did not resemble the fashion of contemporary settlers. While the diary is cautious and measured, avoiding outright claims, it hints at knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and herbal medicine that seemed unusually advanced for the region. Could these have been descendants of the Merovingians, carrying forward their lineage in secret, or was it merely an imaginative interpretation of encounters with European traders? The ambiguity is precisely what keeps the mystery alive. Beyond personal accounts, maps and sketches also provide subtle evidence of forgotten encounters. Early cartographers occasionally included locations of unknown settlements or annotated territories with symbols whose meaning has long been debated. Some of these symbols correspond to European heraldry, others to geometric forms associated with sacred knowledge. Scholars have suggested that these marks indicate the presence of hidden communities, perhaps Merovingian enclaves, that were deliberately concealed from public view. Each mark, each notation, is a whisper of a past carefully veiled, awaiting interpretation by those willing to read between the lines. What emerges from these scattered records is a pattern of deliberate concealment intertwined with strategic communication. The Merovingians, it seems, were acutely aware of the dangers they faced. By embedding their presence into diaries, oral stories, artifacts, and maps, they created a hidden network of memory, one that could survive even if overt traces were destroyed. Their story becomes not just a tale of migration, but a testament to survival, ingenuity, and the resilience of memory itself. As we continue deeper into this exploration, the challenge is to separate truth from legend, to discern patterns amidst fragments, and to follow the faint trail left by those who moved silently across continents. The encounters recorded in these forgotten chronicles are not just curiosities. They are the connective tissue linking Europe to the Americas, past to present, and history to mystery. Each fragment, each coded record, nudges us closer to understanding a legacy that was never meant to be erased entirely, a legacy that whispers from the shadows, waiting to be heard. Modern science has begun to enter territories once reserved for legend, and nowhere is this more provocative than in the study of bloodlines. The Merovingians, long shrouded in myth, have inspired not only historians and conspiracy theorists, but also genetic researchers curious about the possibility of surviving descendants. In Europe, some families still claim direct lineage from the long-haired kings, their traditions and genealogies meticulously preserved over centuries. These claims, often dismissed by mainstream scholars as fanciful or self-aggrandizing, are now being examined through the lens of DNA and modern ancestry tracing. Could the sacred bloodline that once ruled the Frankish kingdoms truly persist into the present, and even across the Atlantic into the Americas? The science of genetics allows us to investigate questions that historians alone cannot answer. By analyzing Y chromosome markers and mitochondrial DNA, researchers can trace lineage and geographic origins with remarkable accuracy. Certain genetic signatures, rare and distinctive, have been proposed as markers of Merovingian descent. Though these claims are controversial and not universally accepted, the patterns that emerge are compelling. Some isolated European families, living far from the centers of historical power, carry genetic traces that suggest continuity with the ancient Frankish rulers. Their existence challenges the neat narrative of history and hints at survival strategies that extended beyond mere memory or tradition. Even more intriguing is the possibility that these lineages were transported across the ocean. Historical speculation suggests that Merovingian descendants, fleeing political persecution or seeking new opportunities, may have settled in remote areas of North America. Over generations, their genetic legacy could have mingled with indigenous and colonial populations, leaving subtle markers that persist today. Researchers studying isolated communities in the Appalachian Mountains, parts of New England, and certain areas of the Midwest have noted unusual concentrations of genetic markers that align with European lineages absent from mainstream immigration records. While the evidence is far from conclusive, it invites consideration of a hidden migration, an American chapter in the Merovingian story that has been largely ignored. The intersection of legend and science becomes even more fascinating when we consider cultural and familial practices. Families claiming Merovingian descent often maintain rituals, symbols, and oral histories that mirror ancient European traditions. Certain ceremonial behaviors, patterns of naming, and heraldic symbols are preserved across centuries, sometimes surviving even when official documents were lost or destroyed. When viewed alongside genetic data, these cultural continuities suggest a deliberate effort to safeguard identity, creating a living repository of history encoded not just in blood, but in practice and memory. But science is not the only lens through which this legacy can be explored. Anthropology and sociology reveal how identity and memory persist in communities removed from historical centers. In these pockets of society, individuals may carry an intuitive awareness of their heritage, expressed through customs, storytelling, and subtle symbols in art, architecture, and communal spaces. Some researchers propose that these behaviors act as social DNA, a means of transmitting identity and lineage across generations, independent of formal historical record. In other words, the Merovingian bloodline might live not only in chromosomes, but in culture itself, embedded in ways that are only now being recognized by modern scholars. Controversy surrounds the idea of pure bloodlines, and rightly so. Genetic inheritance is complex, and centuries of intermarriage make it impossible to trace an unbroken line with absolute certainty. Yet the fascination lies not in proving absolute purity, but in uncovering continuity, the survival of a lineage, a heritage, and an influence that endures despite political upheaval, exile, and deliberate suppression. The Merovingians, if these claims hold any truth, mastered the art of survival, ensuring that even if kingship was stripped from them, their blood, and by extension, their secrets, remained. In North America, this science meets mystery. If descendants of the Merovingians did settle in secret, they may have carried not only DNA, but also esoteric knowledge, symbols, and traditions. Some families still traced genealogies back to obscure European ancestors, guided by oral histories and the occasional rare manuscript. Though documentation is scant, the patterns are intriguing. Geographic clustering, recurring family names, and even subtle markers in property layouts or family artifacts hint at an inheritance far older than colonial America itself. DNA testing could, in theory, validate these claims, but the results are often treated with skepticism, leaving the story suspended between science and legend. Beyond genetics, the study of bloodlines raises profound philosophical and cultural questions. What does it mean for a lineage to survive? Is it merely the passage of DNA, or does survival require the preservation of knowledge, culture, and identity? For the Merovingians, the answer may lie in the interplay of all three. Their symbols, prophecies, secret societies, and perhaps even their journey to a distant continent all serve as mechanisms of continuity. The bloodline is only one thread in a vast tapestry of preservation, a tapestry woven with care, secrecy, and foresight. This merging of science and legend transforms our understanding of history. Where once the Merovingians were dismissed as an enigmatic footnote, they now emerge as a living presence, their influence extending across oceans and centuries. Modern DNA research, paired with cultural and historical investigation, opens the possibility that the line of long-haired kings is not merely a relic of the past, but a subtle, ongoing force, hidden in plain sight, yet enduring. As we proceed to the next section, the focus shifts from biology to the forces that actively sought to erase these traces. Secret societies, political power structures, and religious authorities all had reasons to suppress knowledge of surviving Merovingians. Understanding the bloodline is only part of the story. The full picture emerges when we examine the conflict between concealment and revelation, and the extraordinary lengths to which those in power went to maintain control over the narrative. In this shadowed interplay, the true depth of Merovingian survival begins to come into focus, hinting at secrets that may still lie dormant, waiting to be uncovered. Throughout history, the forces of power have often sought to control not only the present, but also the past. For the Merovingians, the consequences of their survival and influence were profound, and those in positions of authority saw them as a threat that needed to be silenced. Monarchs, the church, and colonial administrations all had stakes in ensuring that certain truths remained hidden. Any revelation of a surviving bloodline could destabilize the narrative carefully constructed to legitimize new rulers and erase inconvenient histories. This is why so many manuscripts were destroyed, settlements obscured, and stories suppressed, forces acting to impose silence upon a people who refused to disappear entirely. One of the most chilling aspects of this suppression is the deliberate erasure of evidence from public memory. Libraries were purged of texts that hinted at Merovingian influence outside of France, and clerical authorities often categorized such writings as heretical or dangerous. Accounts of European travelers encountering unknown settlers in the Americas were dismissed, altered, or quietly removed from official archives. In some cases, explorers' journals were confiscated or rewritten, stripping away the names, symbols, and narratives that pointed toward a secret lineage. Each destroyed record was a strand of history deliberately severed, yet fragments persisted, concealed in marginal notes, cryptic annotations, or oral retellings. The Church, in particular, played a significant role in controlling the narrative. The Merovingians were associated with sacred bloodlines, Grail legends, and esoteric knowledge, elements that challenged ecclesiastical authority. By suppressing manuscripts, forbidding certain rituals, and denouncing knowledge as heretical, Religious authorities could ensure that the sacred secrets of the dynasty would not interfere with the sanctioned version of history. In this context, every symbol etched into stone, every relic carried across the Atlantic, became an act of quiet rebellion, a way for the Merovingians and their supporters to preserve truth in the face of relentless erasure. Political power also contributed to the cover-up. The Carolingians, who replaced the Merovingian kings, had a vested interest in minimizing the presence of any surviving claimants. By rewriting genealogies, controlling education, and promoting selective histories, they sought to establish a narrative in which the Merovingians had faded completely. Later colonial powers, including Spain, England, and France, continued this pattern, particularly in the New World. Any record of secret settlements or unexplained European influences in early North America could have exposed previously unknown connections to the Merovingian lineage, threatening the legitimacy of colonial authority. Even in the Americas, evidence of this oppression is apparent. Settlements that may have hosted Merovingian descendants were often erased from maps or described vaguely in official documents. Archaeological sites that could have provided proof of early European contact were sometimes ignored, misclassified, or destroyed. The pattern is consistent. Anywhere a surviving Merovingian presence might have left an enduring mark, powerful institutions worked to obscure it. Each act of suppression added another layer of mystery, creating a labyrinthine trail that modern researchers must navigate with patience, skepticism, and intuition. Perhaps the most fascinating element is the subtlety with which these forces operated. Suppression was not always violent or overt. It was often bureaucratic, procedural, or embedded in scholarly orthodoxy. Scholars who questioned the official narrative were marginalized, their work dismissed as speculation or pseudo-history. Explorers' accounts were edited or censored to remove inconvenient details. Even physical artifacts were relocated, hidden, or quietly discarded. The result is a landscape of historical shadows, where what survives is often only the faintest hint of what once existed, leaving modern investigators to reconstruct events from the fragments that escaped obliteration. Resistance to this cover-up took many forms. Secret societies, loyal families, and sympathetic chroniclers worked tirelessly to preserve the memory of the Merovingians. Knights, particularly those associated with the Templar or other esoteric orders, are said to have transported documents, relics, and symbols across Europe and eventually to the Americas. These individuals operated in the shadows, creating networks of knowledge that could survive even the most rigorous suppression. Their efforts ensured that traces of the Merovingian legacy persisted, though always hidden, encrypted in ways that would only be decipherable to those initiated into the secret language of the bloodline. The tension between concealment and revelation is a recurring theme in the story of the Merovingians. Every act of suppression has its counterpart in an act of preservation, a quiet defiance that allows history to survive in fragments. In the Americas, this tension is evident in the presence of artifacts, symbolic architecture, and oral traditions that hint at European influence before mainstream colonization. Each fragment represents not just a historical curiosity, but a deliberate attempt to safeguard knowledge against forces intent on erasure. The stakes of this suppression were personal as well as political. Families associated with the Merovingians faced persecution, forced exile, and in some cases, assassination. Maintaining secrecy was not simply a matter of discretion, it was a matter of survival. Every artifact hidden, every manuscript copied in code, and every lineage preserved was a lifeline to the past, a way of ensuring that the bloodline, the knowledge, and the influence of the Merovingians would endure despite relentless opposition. By examining the forces that sought to silence the Merovingians, we gain insight into why their presence in the Americas has remained obscure. It is not merely the passage of time that has hidden them, but the deliberate, coordinated efforts of powerful institutions to control what history could be remembered. The result is a landscape where discovery requires patience, discernment, and a willingness to see beyond the official narrative. Every hidden settlement, every cryptic artifact, and every surviving manuscript becomes a testament to resilience, a faint, yet unbreakable, thread connecting the past to the present. In understanding this struggle between suppression and survival, we come to appreciate the extraordinary lengths the Merovingians and their allies went to preserve their legacy. Their story is not one of simple disappearance, but of endurance against forces determined to erase them. The shadow of these efforts lingers across continents, encoded in artifacts, hidden settlements, and the faint whispers of oral histories. It is here, in this twilight of secrecy and revelation, that the true complexity of the Merovingian legacy begins to emerge, a legacy that is as much about resistance and survival as it is about kings and bloodlines. Even as centuries passed and empires rose and fell, traces of the Merovingians persisted quietly, woven into the fabric of society in ways most would never recognize. Their influence, subtle and often invisible to mainstream history, may have reached across oceans, carried forward not by armies or politicians, but by descendants who lived in the shadows, blending into new worlds. In North America, these modern shadows suggest a legacy that survived far beyond the medieval past, hinting at families, communities, and institutions that unknowingly, or perhaps deliberately, preserve the lineage and knowledge of the long-haired kings. Evidence of this modern influence is elusive but compelling. Certain families in remote regions of the United States maintain genealogical records that trace back to obscure European lines, some claiming connection to nobility and royal blood. These genealogies are often fragmentary, but recurring surnames, heraldic symbols, and documented traditions suggest continuity. Some records appear in places as disparate as the Appalachian Mountains, Louisiana bayous, and isolated New England towns, areas that historically had minimal European settlement in early colonial times. Could these families, intentionally or unintentionally, carry the hidden threads of the Merovingian line? The patterns raise questions that conventional history cannot fully answer. Beyond bloodlines, the cultural footprint of the Merovingians may also survive in symbols, architecture, and secretive societies. Certain estates, churches, and civic buildings in North America exhibit designs that echo European Merovingian motifs. Subtle fleur-de-lis carvings, geometric patterns, and heraldic references hidden in plain sight. These symbols often appear in unexpected locations, incorporated into architecture, stained glass, and municipal seals. Their presence hints at deliberate preservation, as if descendants sought to maintain a visual connection to an ancestral past while remaining unnoticed by the general public. The influence extends beyond the physical into the social and intellectual. Esoteric societies, fraternal organizations, and private orders, some tracing origins to European traditions, may serve as custodians of Merovingian knowledge. Their rituals, codes, and teachings often appear disconnected from history, but may encode fragments of a lost worldview, preserved across generations. Within these organizations, symbols, ceremonies, and oral histories act as repositories of memory, ensuring that the principles, myths, and perhaps even the spiritual practices of the Merovingians survive in subtle, indirect ways. The modern existence of these groups hints at a silent continuum. Knowledge, once confined to Europe, transported and protected on another continent. Political and economic influence may also bear subtle marks of Merovingian legacy. Scholars and investigators note that certain elite families in North America maintain networks of influence and wealth that trace back centuries, often linked to European ancestry. While direct evidence of Merovingian descent is elusive, the convergence of genealogy, secretive behavior, and continuity of symbols suggests that some power structures may preserve vestiges of the old bloodline. It is a reminder that influence need not be overt to endure. It can operate through culture, tradition, and subtle control of knowledge. Even in popular culture, echoes of the Merovingians appear. Folklore, literature, and hidden references in historical accounts carry fragments of the narrative. Legends of mysterious travelers, unexplained European artifacts, and ancient symbols embedded in the landscape suggest that the story never entirely disappeared. In some cases, these cultural echoes function as indirect communication, a way of transmitting the presence of a lineage that could not openly declare itself. They are whispers of memory, scattered across time and geography, waiting for those who recognize their meaning. The persistence of such influence challenges our understanding of history itself. Conventional narratives often depict the Americas as a clean slate prior to widespread European colonization, yet the evidence, genealogical, symbolic, and cultural, suggests otherwise. The Merovingians may have shaped this new world, not through conquest, but through subtle survival, quietly embedding elements of their culture, knowledge, and authority. In this light, history is not a simple sequence of events, but a layered tapestry, where what is remembered is carefully curated, and what is hidden may be more consequential than what is visible. The interplay between secrecy and survival is central to this legacy. Modern descendants, intentionally or not, may carry forward knowledge once considered dangerous or forbidden. Their practices, rituals, symbols, genealogical records, represent a living memory of the past, connecting present communities with a lineage that mainstream history seeks to ignore. These hidden threads create continuity, forming a bridge between centuries of suppression and modern rediscovery. Every artifact, every documented genealogy, and every esoteric practice is a link in a chain stretching from medieval Europe to contemporary America. Even geography itself may hold subtle testimony. Certain towns, estates, and rural regions display patterns reminiscent of European settlement strategies, sacred geometry, or alignment with natural landmarks in ways that echo Old World traditions. While not definitive proof, these patterns suggest deliberate choices, perhaps informed by knowledge carried from Europe or by the desire to replicate aspects of a sacred and culturally significant environment. The landscape, in this sense, becomes a silent witness, preserving memory in soil, stone, and architecture long after written records have vanished. The modern Merovingian shadow is thus not an obvious presence, but a subtle one, detectable only to those who know where and how to look. Their influence is encoded in family histories, cultural practices, architecture, and symbols scattered across the continent. It is a form of survival that requires discretion and patience, relying on the quiet endurance of memory rather than overt power. This hidden influence reminds us that history is not always what it seems. Beneath the surface of recorded events, there may lie layers of unseen continuity and preservation. In exploring these modern traces, we confront the extraordinary possibility that the Merovingian legacy has never truly ended. Descendants, symbols, cultural practices, and secret knowledge may continue to shape communities and influence society in ways that go unnoticed. By recognizing these patterns, we begin to see the Americas not as a tabula rasa, but as a landscape subtly imprinted with the remnants of a lineage that endured through centuries of suppression and exile. These shadows form the connective tissue between past and present, revealing a story that is ongoing, intricate, and deeply hidden from view. As we move to the next section, the focus shifts from modern influence to sacred artifacts, the Grail and other relics said to carry not just spiritual significance, but a tangible connection to the Merovingian bloodline. In tracing these relics, we will see how physical objects act as both carriers of memory and instruments of survival, linking the hidden past to tangible evidence in the present. The Grail, shrouded in legend and reverence, has long captivated imaginations, a symbol of divine authority, sacred blood, and ultimate knowledge. For the Merovingians, it was more than myth. It was a tangible connection to their sacred lineage, a vessel through which divine legitimacy and mystical power could be understood. While most Grail legends place it firmly in Europe, whispers and fragments suggest that relics, or knowledge associated with them, may have traveled further, carried secretly to the Americas. These relics were not simply objects of worship. They were keys, encoded with meaning, their presence shaping settlements, rituals, and even the alignment of sacred spaces across continents. Accounts of the Grail's journey are fragmentary, often contradictory, yet they share a common thread, a deliberate, secretive movement designed to protect it from those who would exploit or destroy it. Following the fall of the Merovingian kings and the rise of rival powers, the Grail, and by extension, the bloodline, became a target. Secret networks, including knights, loyal families, and esoteric societies, are believed to have orchestrated its relocation, hiding it in places where knowledge could survive even if memory was suppressed. Some theories suggest that parts of the Grail, fragments, or symbolic representations, may have reached North America long before official colonization, leaving subtle markers in settlements, artifacts, and ceremonial grounds. These relics carried more than spiritual significance. They encoded knowledge. Sacred geometry, astronomical information, and philosophical principles were often embedded within the design, materials, and ritual use of these objects. In Europe, the Grail was said to be tied to the land, the ruling bloodline, and divine authority. Transplanted to the New World, it may have served as both a guide and a safeguard, influencing settlement locations, architecture, and cultural practices in ways hidden from mainstream historians. Every ceremonial placement, every carefully chosen location, acted as a safeguard of continuity, a way for Merovingian knowledge to survive in exile. There are hints of these influences in early colonial architecture and land usage. Certain settlements exhibit layouts that mirror European sacred geometry, from the alignment of public spaces to the positioning of monuments and religious structures. Subtle symbols carved into stone or incorporated into municipal seals suggest deliberate continuity with European traditions, often echoing Merovingian motifs. These patterns are rarely overt. They exist on the edges of perception, waiting for those trained in symbolism and sacred knowledge to recognize their meaning. Could these choices have been guided by relics or the encoded wisdom they carried? The evidence is circumstantial, yet persistent, forming a silent map of hidden influence. Artifacts themselves carry an aura of mystery. Coins, ceremonial objects, and inscriptions bearing unique symbols suggest a deliberate transplantation of culture and authority. Some objects are mundane in appearance, but are aligned with spiritual or astronomical principles, marking them as more than mere decoration. Scholars suggest that these items were intended to communicate knowledge discreetly to those capable of interpreting the encoded messages. In effect, the Grail's journey may have been both physical and intellectual, carrying sacred knowledge across oceans to ensure that the Merovingian lineage remained connected to its ancient wisdom. The Grail's journey is also tied to prophecy. Medieval texts attribute visions and predictions to the Merovingians, describing events in Europe and beyond. Some interpretations suggest that these prophecies guided the transportation of sacred objects to preserve continuity in a foreign land. The interplay between prophecy and action suggests a calculated strategy. Protect the bloodline, safeguard the knowledge, and ensure that sacred relics could continue to influence the world, even in secrecy. In this light, the Grail is not simply an object. It is a living, strategic tool, guiding actions and shaping decisions across continents. Indigenous narratives and early settlers' accounts provide tantalizing hints of these sacred objects. Stories of mysterious visitors, rare artifacts, and ceremonies performed in secluded valleys suggest a continuity of knowledge previously thought impossible. These accounts are often dismissed as folklore, yet when compared with European legends and patterns of settlement, they reveal a fascinating convergence. The idea emerges that sacred knowledge was not just preserved in Europe, but intentionally carried across the Atlantic, embedded in rituals, objects, and architecture to endure through generations. Some researchers have identified specific sites in North America as potential resting places for Grail relics or their symbolic equivalents. While evidence is circumstantial, patterns of alignment with celestial events, geographic features, and symbolic markers hint at deliberate placement. Hills, rivers, and rock formations may have been chosen with the same precision used in European sacred sites. The landscape itself becomes a map, a repository of hidden knowledge that reflects the Merovingian understanding of sacred space, cosmology, and the integration of spiritual and political authority. The mystical power attributed to the Grail may also explain why its secrecy was paramount. Beyond symbolism and knowledge, the Grail represents legitimacy and influence. To reveal its existence or location could invite conquest, theft, or destruction. The Merovingians, well aware of the dangers, used secrecy as protection, ensuring that the relics would serve as tools of survival rather than instruments of vulnerability. This approach underscores a recurring theme in Merovingian history: the interplay of concealment and preservation, a strategy that allowed them to endure even when overt political power was lost. In contemplating the Grail's journey to the Americas, one begins to see history not as a straightforward narrative of exploration and conquest, but as a multi-layered tapestry of secrecy, survival, and intention. Sacred relics, far from being passive symbols, functioned as living agents of continuity, guiding those who carried them and leaving subtle marks on the world around them. They are both evidence and enigma, tangible yet elusive, connecting the Merovingians of Europe to a hidden legacy in the New World. As the story unfolds further, these relics become a key piece of the puzzle in understanding the full extent of Merovingian survival. They bridge the gap between past and present, Europe and America, myth and tangible history. The Grail, in all its mystery and power, is not merely a legend of medieval kings. It is a vessel of continuity, a silent witness to the extraordinary lengths taken to preserve knowledge, bloodline, and influence across continents and centuries. As we trace the threads of history, prophecy, bloodline, and symbolism, a larger pattern begins to emerge, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about the Merovingians and their survival in the Americas. The evidence, scattered across continents and centuries, converges in a way that is at once subtle and profound. From hidden settlements and symbolic architecture to sacred relics and modern genealogical traces, it becomes increasingly clear that the Merovingian story did not end with the fall of their dynasty in Europe. Instead, it continued, carefully hidden, shaping events and influencing history from the shadows. Consider the convergence of physical evidence first. Artifacts, symbols, and heraldry appear in locations across North America that defy simple explanation. Fleur-de-lis motifs carved into colonial buildings, geometric layouts reminiscent of European sacred sites, and hidden markers in remote settlements all point to a deliberate pattern. These are not isolated occurrences, but part of a broader network, a deliberate act of preservation, a visual language meant to endure even as written records were destroyed. Each symbol acts as both a clue and a safeguard, linking the New World to a lineage that centuries of political upheaval sought to erase. Then there is the evidence preserved in manuscripts, journals, and oral histories. Fragmented accounts of European visitors interacting with indigenous populations, mysterious objects being transported across oceans, and rituals performed in secluded locations all align with the story of a hidden lineage. Scholars and adventurers who have attempted to trace these threads are often met with skepticism, yet the patterns persist. Knowledge of navigation, astronomy, and sacred geometry appears repeatedly in places and times where official history cannot account for it. The narrative that emerges is not of chance, but of deliberate action, a series of calculated measures designed to preserve both bloodline and knowledge. The bloodline itself, examined through genealogy and modern genetics, offers further confirmation. Families with European origins maintain oral traditions and rare documents that point toward royal or noble ancestry, sometimes tracing back to the Merovingians. DNA studies, though not conclusive, suggest the survival of rare markers consistent with ancient Frankish lineages. These families, living quietly in America, carry with them the living memory of a dynasty thought long gone. In essence, the bloodline becomes a bridge between continents and centuries, a living proof that suppression could never fully erase their existence. Sacred artifacts, particularly those associated with the Grail, add yet another layer to this hidden network. Relics transported across the Atlantic, carefully concealed in remote locations, who have acted as both spiritual anchors and practical guides, preserving knowledge of the Merovingian lineage. The alignment of settlements, ceremonial grounds, and natural landmarks suggests that these objects were not merely decorative or symbolic. They encoded principles of sacred geometry, cosmology, and governance. The Grail and related artifacts were not passive. They were active instruments, influencing where people settled, how rituals were conducted, and how knowledge was transmitted quietly from one generation to the next. Secret societies emerge as the final connecting thread in this web of hidden influence. Knights, fraternal organizations, and esoteric orders are rumored to have acted as custodians of both bloodline and knowledge, transporting relics, maintaining genealogical records, and teaching sacred traditions under the veil of secrecy. Their role was not simply ceremonial but strategic, to ensure the survival of a dynasty that the official histories had declared extinct. In modern America, echoes of these networks can still be detected in private organizations and elite families who preserve symbolic and cultural continuity, often without public recognition of their deeper origins. When these threads are combined, bloodline, relics, symbols, manuscripts, and secret societies, a remarkable picture emerges. It is not a tale of scattered, accidental survival, but a coordinated, centuries-long strategy of preservation. The Merovingians, though politically vanquished in Europe, orchestrated a quiet migration of knowledge, influence, and lineage to a new continent. Their story becomes a narrative of resilience, cunning, and foresight, a blueprint for survival that relied on subtlety rather than overt power. It is a story written not in textbooks, but in hidden spaces, encoded in symbols, preserved in DNA, and whispered through generations. The implications are staggering. If these connections are even partially accurate, then mainstream history is only a fragment of the truth. The Americas, often depicted as a blank slate before European colonization, may in fact have been a stage upon which the Merovingian legacy continued its work, invisible but influential. Culture, geography, symbolism, and even governance may bear faint traces of this hidden influence, overlooked because they were deliberately integrated in ways that avoided detection. History, in this sense, is a palimpsest. The visible layer tells one story, while the hidden layer, preserved in secret, tells another. Yet the true climactic revelation is not merely the survival of bloodlines or relics. It is the realization that the Merovingians' influence extends beyond mere ancestry. It is an entire philosophy, a worldview, and a strategy of preservation carried across centuries. Sacred knowledge, encoded in symbols, rituals, and artifacts, shaped decisions, guided migrations, and influenced the development of communities across the Atlantic. The lineage was not just biological. It was cultural, intellectual, and spiritual, transmitted in ways that ensured continuity even when visibility was impossible. This convergence of people, objects, symbols, and knowledge forces a reconsideration of what we accept as historical truth. The Merovingians were not simply a dynasty erased from power. They were survivors, architects of a hidden narrative, and guardians of secrets that were too dangerous or powerful to be revealed openly. Every artifact unearthed, every genealogical record confirmed, and every symbolic pattern observed is a testament to their enduring presence. It is a story that challenges the boundaries between myth and history, legend and reality, past and present. Finally, the climactic realization settles on the profound notion that the Merovingian legacy is ongoing. It is not confined to the past. It exists in the modern shadows, waiting to be recognized, understood, and traced by those willing to look beyond conventional narratives. The bloodline, the knowledge, and the symbols persist, quietly influencing the present while holding the memory of the past. The Merovingians are, in essence, a living mystery, one that stretches across continents and centuries, revealing a tapestry of survival, cunning, and hidden power that history has only partially acknowledged. This revelation reshapes everything we thought we knew about hidden histories in the Americas. What once seemed like isolated anomalies, unexplained symbols, artifacts, genealogies, or rituals, now coalesce into a coherent narrative of continuity and survival. The Merovingians, though invisible to official history, have left an indelible imprint, one that challenges us to reconsider the very nature of legacy, influence, and memory. In this moment, the silent, centuries-long story of kings and sacred bloodlines becomes clear. They never disappeared. They simply moved into the shadows, where their influence could endure beyond the reach of those who sought to erase them. As we arrive at the final chapter of this journey, it becomes clear that the story of the Merovingians in the Americas is not merely a tale of kings and relics, but a meditation on survival, secrecy, and the persistence of memory across centuries. History, as we know it, is often written by the victors, shaped by those with the power to define truth and erase inconvenient narratives. Yet, hidden beneath the official accounts lies a web of continuity, subtle but enduring, in which the Merovingians played a quiet, profound role. Their influence stretches far beyond their formal reign in Europe, touching continents, cultures, and even the modern imagination in ways both visible and invisible. The remarkable thing about this hidden legacy is its subtlety. Unlike empires that impose themselves through armies and decrees, the Merovingians preserved their influence through quiet resilience. They used symbols, sacred objects, and oral tradition to maintain continuity, leaving a network of traces that could survive centuries of suppression. Their story is not one of overt domination, but of clever preservation, an understanding that survival often requires invisibility. Even in the Americas, these lessons were carried forward by descendants, allies, and secret custodians, ensuring that the essence of the lineage and its sacred knowledge endured despite the tumultuous currents of history. Artifacts, relics, and symbols scattered across North America are the most tangible evidence of this hidden presence. From carvings echoing the fleur-de-lis to architectural layouts reflecting sacred geometry, these traces are more than aesthetic. They are messages encoded across time. They act as quiet witnesses to a past deliberately concealed, reminders of a lineage that could not be erased by political or religious authorities. Each relic, each symbol, is a thread in a vast tapestry, connecting Europe to the New World, past to present, and myth to tangible reality. Equally compelling is the evidence of bloodlines. Genealogical records, preserved family traditions, and even modern genetic studies suggest that descendants of the Merovingians may still walk among us. These individuals may live ordinary lives, unaware of the extraordinary lineage they carry, or they may maintain discrete knowledge, preserving rituals, symbols, and oral histories that trace back centuries. The persistence of the bloodline underscores a key truth. Heritage is not only written in documents or captured in monuments. It is carried in people, in memory, and in the subtle continuity of culture. This legacy is also deeply philosophical. The Merovingian story challenges our understanding of time, memory, and influence. It demonstrates how knowledge can be protected, transmitted, and preserved in ways that evade conventional history. Sacred relics, symbolic architecture, secret societies, and genealogical continuity all converge to create a multidimensional narrative of survival. It is a reminder that history is not simply a record of what happened. It is a layered construct shaped by those who remember and those who forget, by what is revealed and what is deliberately concealed. In reflecting on their journey to the Americas, one sees a fascinating interplay between concealment and revelation. The Merovingians operated in shadows, yet their presence is detectable if one knows where and how to look. The subtle patterns they left behind, in architecture, symbols, rituals, and even landscape alignment, reveal an understanding of continuity that is both practical and spiritual. This dual approach ensured that the bloodline and its sacred knowledge would endure even when political and religious forces sought to eliminate it. It is a testament to foresight, ingenuity, and the enduring power of memory. Modern discoveries, from obscure manuscripts to the alignment of early settlements, hint at a narrative that mainstream history largely overlooks. In some cases, these clues were deliberately designed to be subtle, comprehensible only to those initiated into a particular understanding of symbols and sacred knowledge. This intentional secrecy is part of what makes the Merovingian story so compelling. It exists in a liminal space between myth and history, inviting curiosity and discovery without offering immediate answers. It challenges us to think critically, to question accepted narratives, and to explore the possibilities hidden beneath the surface of recorded events. Perhaps most profoundly, the Merovingian legacy encourages a reflection on the nature of influence itself. True influence is not always visible in grand monuments or political power. It can survive quietly, embedded in culture, memory, and subtle forms of continuity. The Merovingians understood this principle, preserving their lineage not through force, but through the careful orchestration of knowledge, symbols, and sacred artifacts. In doing so, they demonstrated a remarkable ability to adapt, survive, and persist across centuries, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. As the story concludes, we are left with both answers and questions. The evidence suggests that the Merovingians survived, migrated, and left traces that continue to resonate in the Americas. Bloodlines may persist, relics may endure, and symbols may still convey secret knowledge. Yet much remains hidden, waiting to be discovered by those willing to see beyond the conventional record. The narrative challenges us to reconsider the boundaries of history and to recognize that what appears absent may in fact be present, carefully concealed in plain sight. In this way, the story of the Merovingians is not confined to the past. It is ongoing, existing in the quiet influence of descendants, in the hidden meanings of symbols, and in the enduring power of memory. Their legacy invites us to think beyond the surface of events, to recognize that history is layered, multidimensional, and often far richer than it appears. Every artifact, every symbol, every trace is a reminder of continuity, of a story carefully preserved against the tides of time. Ultimately, the journey through the Merovingian legacy is a meditation on resilience, secrecy, and the enduring power of knowledge. It challenges us to look deeper, to question what has been erased, and to seek the hidden threads that connect past and present. The kings with long hair may no longer rule, and the courts and castles of Europe may lie in ruins, but their influence persists, quiet, subtle, and extraordinary. In the end, history is not only what is written, it is what survives, what endures, and what whispers across generations, waiting for those who are willing to listen.